I want you to picture a stoplight on an ordinary Tuesday. In the left lane sits a brand new, blacked out luxury SUV, the kind with the badge everyone recognizes, freshly washed, dealer plates still on. In the right lane, idling next to it, is a 10-year-old Honda with a small dent in the bumper and a coffee cup on the dash. If I asked you which driver was wealthy, you already have an answer. Almost everyone does. And here is the strange part. Across America in 2026, the safer bet, the statistically smarter bet, is the dented Honda. The person in the luxury SUV is far more likely to be drowning. The person in the Honda is far more likely to be free. So how did we arrive at a place where the people who look the richest are often the most broke, while the people quietly building real wealth go out of their way to look like they have nothing? That question is the whole video. Because looking poor, on purpose, turns out to be one of the most important financial moves a person can make. And the wealthy have understood it for a very long time. Let me show you who is actually sitting in that luxury SUV, because the picture is not what the marketing wants you to believe. A decade ago, the loud spenders were a smaller, more obvious crowd. Today, they are everywhere, and a startling share of them are running on fumes. Heading into 2026, roughly 60% of Americans were living paycheck to paycheck. That number on its own is sobering. The detail underneath it is the one that should stop you cold. Around 40% of people earning six figures, $100,000 a year or more, were also living paycheck to paycheck. Think about that for a second. 2 out of 5 high earners, the exact people we assume have it all figured out, finish the month with nothing left over. It helps to see where the money actually goes. The average American household now spends somewhere around $6,500 a month just to live, which works out to roughly $78,000 a year before a single luxury is added. Meanwhile, the personal savings rate, the slice of income the typical American manages to keep, sat at about 4.5% in early 2026. Historically, that figure has averaged closer to 8.5%. So we are keeping about half of what previous generations did, while spending more than ever to look the part. More than half of adults said they could not cover a surprise $1,000 expense out of savings. Over a quarter reported having no emergency cushion at all, the highest level ever recorded. One survey put the typical emergency savings balance at around $600, not $6,000, $600. That is the actual financial reality humming beneath a lot of those glossy car payments and weekend photos. And the makeup of that struggle has been quietly shifting. For a while, a chunk of people living paycheck to paycheck were doing it by choice, spending freely because they felt comfortable. Over the last couple of years, that group has shrunk, and the share doing it out of pure necessity has grown and overtaken them. In plain terms, more people are stretched not because they are splurging, but because the basics now eat almost everything. So when you glance at that shiny SUV and feel a flicker of envy, hold on to this. A large share of those payments are being made by people who are one missed paycheck away from a genuine crisis. Here is the detail that almost everyone misses, and it explains the whole illusion. The loud version of wealth and the real version of wealth are rarely the same people. We have simply been trained to confuse them. To understand why we keep falling for it, you have to understand what spending is actually doing for us, because it is hardly ever about the object itself. Humans are wired to read status. For most of our history, those signals carried survival information: who had food, who had protection, who was worth aligning with. That instinct never disappeared, it just got hijacked. Today, the signals are a watch, a logo, a car, a renovated kitchen, a vacation framed at exactly the right angle. We are not really buying the thing. We are buying a sentence we hope other people will say about us. There is even a name in economics for goods that get more desirable precisely because they are expensive, because the price tag is the point. The trouble is that the people we are performing for are performing right back, which means everyone is dressing up for an audience that is too distracted by its own costume to notice yours. Economists have a blunt word for the cycle this creates: the treadmill. You buy the nicer car, you feel the lift for a few weeks, and then that new car quietly becomes your normal. The lift fades. So you reach for the next upgrade just to feel the same spark again. The scenery never changes because you are running in place. And the cruelest twist is that the treadmill speeds up as your income climbs. That is lifestyle inflation. And it is the silent killer hiding behind those paycheck-to-paycheck six-figure earners. Their income went up, their spending crept up to match it, then nudged a little past it. A raise that should have bought freedom bought a heavier stack of monthly obligations instead. The faster they ran, the more firmly they stayed exactly where they started. There is a sneaky mechanism that makes this worse, and you have almost certainly felt it without naming it. A single nice purchase quietly demands a dozen more to match it. Buy one beautiful chair that makes the rest of the room look shabby, and suddenly the couch has to go. Then the rug, then the curtains, then the coffee table that no longer fits the new vibe. One upgrade sets the new baseline, and everything around it has to rise to meet it. The same thing happens at a larger scale with the people we let into our lives. Move into the nicer neighborhood, and the pressure arrives uninvited. The unspoken expectation about the kind of car that belongs in that driveway, the vacations the other families take, the schools, the renovations, the version of yourself that fits the zip code. The wealthy who stay wealthy tend to notice this cascade early and refuse to start it. They understand that the most expensive part of a purchase is often not the purchase. It is everything that purchase quietly obligates you to buy next. Now, let me put a hard number on the cost of looking rich, because the math is more punishing than people let themselves admit. Start with the single most visible status symbol in American life, the car. In December of 2025, the average price paid for a new vehicle hit a record, just over $50,000. The average monthly payment on a new car climbed to nearly $770, an all-time high. The average new car loan now runs around $44,000. To make those payments survivable, buyers are stretching loans to lengths that would have sounded absurd a generation ago. More than a third of new car loans now run longer than 6 years, 85-month terms, which is over 7 years of payments on a machine engineered to lose value the moment you drive it home, are climbing fast. Nearly 1 in 5 new car loans now carries a payment north of $1,000 a month. And here is the part the luxury ads never mention. Most of those $1,000 payments are not for exotic supercars. They are for ordinary trucks and family SUVs, bought by ordinary people who decided the monthly payment was simply the price of looking like they had arrived. The depreciation underneath all of that is the quiet bleed nobody factors in. A new car typically sheds a fifth or more of its value in the first year alone, and a big chunk of the rest over the next 4. So when someone signs an 85-month loan, there is a long stretch in the middle where they owe more on the car than the car is worth. They are underwater, paying interest on value that already evaporated. If the car gets totaled or they need to sell, the loan does not politely shrink to match. They are on the hook for the gap. Multiply that pattern across the country and you get the scale of it. Americans now owe more than $1.67 trillion in auto loan debt. That is not a typo. The car, the thing we treat as the obvious badge of having made it, has quietly become one of the largest anchors dragging households under. Sit with that picture for a moment, because we're about to run the calculation almost nobody runs before they sign. A car payment is never just a car payment. It is a decision about your future self. Take that average new car payment, call it roughly $750 a month, and imagine doing something quietly radical with it instead. You drive a paid-off used car, and you funnel that same $750 into a low-cost index fund every single month. At a long-run average return, somewhere around 7% after inflation, that habit grows to well over $100,000 in 10 years. Keep it running for 30 years, and you are staring at a figure north of $900,000. So the real choice was never nice car or boring car. The real choice was a nicer car now or close to $1 million later. That is the second cost, the one that never appears on the window sticker. Every dollar locked into looking wealthy is a dollar that can never go to work becoming wealthy. The kind of trade-off that, spelled out plainly, makes accountants wince. And the younger you are when you see this, the more violent the difference becomes, because time does the heavy lifting. Picture someone 25 years old choosing between the loud option and the quiet one. They could finance the impressive car now and feel like they made it, or they could drive something boring and reliable, take that same payment, and let it compound until they are in their 50s. By then, the gap is not $100,000 or even a few $100,000. It is the difference between still clocking in because they have to and walking away because they want to. The luxury car did not just cost a monthly payment. It quietly purchased a decade of extra working years and handed the bill to a future version of the person who never got a vote. And the car is only the most obvious example, because the same logic runs straight through the biggest purchase most people ever make, the house. There is a quiet trap in buying more home than you need, and it has almost nothing to do with the mortgage payment itself. Every major possession drags a whole ecosystem of expenses behind it, what you might call the lifestyle multiplier. A bigger house is not just a bigger payment, it is more property tax, more insurance, more heating and cooling, more maintenance on more square footage, and then the slow, almost invisible pressure to fill all those rooms with furniture you would never have bought if the rooms did not exist. Buy the big house and suddenly you need the bigger couch, the second living room set, the lawn equipment, the storage for the things you bought to fill the space you bought. A purchase that felt like one decision quietly becomes a dozen. The genuinely wealthy tend to run that full calculation before they commit, which is why so many of them live in homes that are noticeably more modest than their net worth could justify. They understood that the house does not just cost what it costs everything it pulls along behind it. The bill for the image does not always wait 30 years either. Often it arrives every single month with interest attached. Americans were carrying about $1.25 trillion in credit card debt at the start of 2026. For households that carry a balance, the average sat near $6,700. The average interest rate on cards actually charging interest was roughly 21%. That is a brutal number when you really look at it. Because when you finance a lifestyle on a card at 21%, you are not just paying for the thing, you are paying for the thing and then paying the bank a steep fee for the privilege of pretending you could afford it in the first place. A $6,000 balance at that rate, covered only at the minimum payment, can take the better part of a decade to clear and pile thousands of dollars in interest on top of the original purchases. Zoom all the way out, and total household debt in America has crossed $18.8 trillion. A meaningful slice of that is not survival or emergency. It is performance. It is the running cost of a costume that fools strangers and quietly robs the person wearing it. Now, before we get to what the wealthy do instead, there is a number that reframes everything, and it is the one almost nobody sees because it is invisible by design. It is net worth. Income announces itself loudly, while net worth stays almost completely silent. And in America, the gap between those two things is staggering. The median household net worth, the true middle, sits at around $192,000. But the average gets reported as roughly $1.06 million because a small number of enormously wealthy households drag the average upward. The median is the honest picture, and it tells you most people own far less than the cars and houses around them suggest. It gets sharper by age. Households under 35 have a median net worth somewhere near $39,000, while older households who kept and invested for decades sit many times higher. And here is the line researchers keep returning to. Your savings rate predicts your future wealth better than your income does. A high earner who saves almost nothing ends up poorer in retirement than a modest earner who quietly kept and invested a fifth of everything. The faucet does not decide who is wealthy. What you do with the water does. Once you really absorb that, you start seeing your whole street differently. The house with the boat in the driveway and the 2 new trucks is no longer obviously the rich house. It might be, or it might be the most leveraged household on the block. One bad quarter from selling everything at a loss. The neighbor in the paid-off older car, The one whose lawn furniture has lasted 15 years might be sitting on a portfolio that would surprise you. You genuinely cannot tell from the outside, and that is exactly the point the wealthy are counting on. The signals we were all taught to read as wealth are, more often than not, signals of spending. And spending and wealth are not just different things. They frequently move in opposite directions, because every dollar that goes loud is a dollar that cannot go to work. So if that is what looking rich actually costs, the obvious question is what the genuinely wealthy do instead. And this is where the story turns, because the answer is almost boring. That, it turns out, is exactly why it works. Go back to the stoplight, to the dented Honda. The data has been pointing at that car the whole time. Researchers at Experian Automotive found that 61% of households earning more than $250,000 a year do not drive luxury brands at all. They drive Hondas, Toyotas, and Fords, the same cars sitting in your neighbor's driveway. Someone pulling in $250,000 a year could clearly afford the badge. The majority simply choose not to. The personal finance world has been documenting this pattern for decades, ever since a landmark study of American millionaires revealed something that still catches people off guard. Most car buyers tie up close to a third of their net worth in vehicles. Actual millionaires spend around 1%. Fewer than a quarter of them were even driving a current year model. They buy used, they buy quality, they drive it into the ground, and they rarely finance it. The richest people in that research were consistently the least interested in looking the part. A more recent survey of over 600 American millionaires landed in exactly the same place. Frugality kept showing up as one of their defining traits, not as an occasional habit, but as a way of life. The numbers behind who actually becomes wealthy are even more revealing. Around 69% of millionaires never average six figures in household income in a single year. Nearly a third never had a six-figure household income across their entire careers. And roughly 80% are first-generation rich, meaning they built it themselves rather than inheriting it. So the picture that forms is not a story of giant salaries and glittering lives. It is a story of ordinary incomes meeting unusual discipline. One financial author compressed the whole secret into a single sentence worth memorizing. When people stop wasting money trying to look wealthy, they finally have the money to actually become wealthy. Read that again slowly, because it inverts almost everything the marketing world spends billions trying to teach you. You can see it at the very top, too. The founder of one of the world's largest companies has been photographed shopping at a warehouse club. Tech billionaires have been spotted driving modest hybrids worth a tiny fraction of what they could buy outright. Their wealth shows up in freedom and options, not in a logo on a hood. If you are finding this useful, this is the kind of breakdown I publish here every week. The real mechanics of money instead of the highlight reel. With that said, let me pull the lens back, because stealth wealth is no longer just a quirk of a few frugal millionaires. In 2026, it has grown into a full cultural shift, and it is changing how money moves through the whole economy. For a long time, the loudest version of luxury sat at the top, and everyone below strained to climb toward it. That hierarchy is quietly inverting. Among the genuinely wealthy, visible logos have started to read as insecurity rather than success. The new signal is the absence of a signal. A plainly cut, beautifully made coat with no branding. A quality watch only another collector would clock. Status now gets whispered sideways to the handful of people who already recognize it, rather than shouted downward to a crowd. The luxury world even reflects this in its prices, with high-end goods jumping enormously over the past year, in some categories by more than 70%, which only pushes the truly rich further toward the quiet end, where the badge stops mattering at all. Beneath the wealthy, the middle class has started copying the strategy out of pure practicality. There is a movement that picked up a slightly clunky name online, underconsumption, alongside a cousin people call stealth frugality. The entire point is to use what you already own until it genuinely wears out, to repair instead of replace, to stop performing abundance for an audience that does not care. The stigma around buying the cheaper version has largely collapsed. People proudly hunt for the product that delivers most of the experience at a fraction of the price, then route the difference somewhere that actually grows. Some have even gone back to using physical cash for the slippery social categories like dining out. Not because they are broke, but because handing over real bills makes the spending feel real and keeps it in check without looking like penny pinching in public. The quiet result of all of it is that families practicing this are redirecting thousands of dollars a year away from the costume and into their brokerage accounts. The look went out of style at the exact moment people realized the look was making them poor. This brings us to the single most important distinction in all of personal finance, and it sounds almost too simple right up until it reshapes how you see everyone around you. Income is not wealth. Income is the water coming through the faucet. Wealth is the water you actually keep in the tank. A person can have an enormous faucet, a huge salary, and a tank with a crack in the bottom, spending every dollar as fast as it pours in. They look rich and own almost nothing. Another person can have a modest faucet but a sealed tank, keeping and investing a real slice of everything they earn, and quietly become the wealthier of the two. The luxury SUV signals a big faucet. It tells you nothing about the tank. The louder and bigger the signal, the more often it is covering for a tank that is nearly dry. The genuinely wealthy figured this out long ago. They stopped competing on the size of the faucet, which everyone can see, and started competing on the size of the tank, which almost no one can. Looking poor is simply what a full tank looks like from the outside. There is one more layer to it, and it might be the most valuable idea in this entire video. The truest measure of wealth is not the size of the tank either. It is what the tank lets you do. Call it optionality. Can you walk away from a job that is grinding you down? Can you take 6 months off when a family emergency hits? Can you move cities for someone you love? Or start a business without a guaranteed paycheck? Or say no to money that would compromise something you believe in? Those choices are what real wealth actually buys, and they are only available to people who built a wide gap between what they earn and what they spend. The person earning $200,000 but spending nearly all of it has almost no options. They are chained to the next paycheck just like everyone else, only with nicer scenery. The person earning far less but spending well below it has freedom the big earner can only envy. Every flashy purchase is quietly a trade. You are exchanging future options for present appearances. Sometimes that trade is worth it. Far more often, it is not. Let me make this concrete with two people you have probably worked beside. Imagine two coworkers hired the same week, same role, same starting salary, both sharp, both well-liked. The first one celebrates the new job by leasing the car that matches the title, signs for an apartment that stretches the budget to its edge, and over the years upgrades the phone on schedule, the wardrobe on trend, the lifestyle a half step ahead of every raise. From the outside, this person looks like the one who is winning. The second coworker keeps driving the car they already owned, splits a modest place, and quietly routes a fifth of every paycheck into investments before the money ever touches their checking account. For years, this person looks like the one falling behind, the one who never quite seems to have arrived. Then life does what life does. A recession hits, and the company announces layoffs. Both coworkers get the same envelope on the same morning. The first one, the one who looked successful, has roughly nothing saved and a stack of payments that do not pause just because the income did. Within weeks, they are taking the first job that calls, on whatever terms it offers, because the obligations never stopped. The second coworker, the one who looked plain, has a cushion deep enough to breathe. They take a few months. They turn down 2 offers that were not right and accept the one that was, with leverage on their own timeline. Same salary the whole way through. Same town, same opportunities, same starting point. The only real difference was that one of them spent a decade buying the appearance of wealth, and the other spent that same decade quietly buying the real thing. That gap, invisible for years, becomes the entire story the moment the ground shifts. Once that clicks, the whole strategy stops feeling like sacrifice and starts feeling like a cheat code. So let me hand you the actual playbook, the way the quietly wealthy seem to operate, translated into moves you can start using this week. The first move is to decouple your income from your identity. The reason lifestyle inflation is so dangerous is that we treat a raise as permission to upgrade who we are. A bigger paycheck lands, and suddenly the old car feels embarrassing and the apartment feels small. The wealthy interrupt that reflex. When their income rises, their lifestyle mostly holds steady, and the difference flows straight into investments. A raise is not an invitation to spend more. It is a chance to widen the gap between what you earn and what you live on, because that gap, not the salary, is the thing that eventually turns into freedom. The person who keeps living on last year's budget while earning this year's income is the one quietly winning. The second move is to make spending difficult and make saving automatic. Willpower is a terrible long-term plan because it runs out at exactly the wrong moments, when you are tired or stressed or scrolling at midnight. So the wealthy design their environment instead of trusting their discipline. They automate transfers into investments on the very day they get paid, before the money ever feels spendable. They keep only a small, deliberate amount sitting in easy access checking. They delete the shopping apps, remove the saved card numbers, unsubscribe from the promotional emails, and put a simple waiting period between wanting something and buying it. A short cooling off window, even a single day, quietly kills a large share of impulse purchases, because most cravings for an object fade on their own if you just refuse to act on them in the moment. The trick is not to be stronger than temptation. It is to never meet the temptation in the first place. The mechanic underneath this is older than any app, and it is the closest thing personal finance has to a guarantee. Pay yourself first. Most people do it backwards. They earn, they spend on everything that comes up, and then they try to save whatever happens to survive until the end of the month, which is almost always nothing, because life expands to swallow whatever is left. The wealthy flip the order. The investment comes out first, automatically, the instant the paycheck lands, and they build their life around what remains. Same income, completely different outcome, purely because of sequence. When the money is gone before you ever see it, you adjust without drama, the way you adjust to a tax you never had a choice about. And because the contribution is automatic, you keep investing through the scary months as well as the good ones, which is exactly when it matters most. The person who only invests when they feel confident misses the very dips that build the most wealth. The person whose contribution never asks permission just keeps quietly buying, year after year, while everyone else is busy reacting to headlines. The third move is to drive it till it dies, and to extend that same patience to almost everything you own. The fastest way to bleed money is to replace things that still work, either because a newer version exists or because boredom crept in. A phone that makes calls and runs your apps does not need replacing because a slightly better camera launched. A reliable car does not need trading because the neighbor pulled in with something shinier. The wealthy define broken by function, not by feeling. Until something genuinely fails to do its job, it stays. There is a simple calculation that makes this concrete. Before any purchase, estimate how many times you will realistically use the thing, then divide the price by that number. A $200 jacket worn twice costs $100 every time you put it on. A solid jacket worn 200 times costs pennies per wear. Run that math honestly, and most impulse buys collapse on the spot, while the genuinely worthwhile purchases reveal themselves clearly. Over a lifetime, that one habit can be worth a small fortune that would otherwise have evaporated into upgrades nobody remembers a year later. The fourth move is to test before you commit, especially on anything big or new. So much money dies in the graveyard of abandoned enthusiasm. Closets and garages across the country are stuffed with the gear of hobbies that lasted 3 weekends. The camping equipment, the camera, the instruments from the band that played one show. The wealthy treat a new interest as a hypothesis to be tested cheaply, not a reason to buy the full kit on day one. Rent the equipment for the first few trips. Borrow the tool before you buy it. Try the cheap version before the expensive one. Most enthusiasms fade after the first burst, and it is far better to discover that while renting than after you have furnished an entire room around a passion that turned out to be a phase. When the interest proves real, you will also know exactly what you actually need, instead of guessing and overbuying. The fifth move is to define what enough looks like before the money arrives, not after. High earners get trapped because they never set a finish line, so every bump in income just shoves the target further out. They earn more, expect more, and feel exactly as stretched at $300,000 as they did at 80. The wealthy decide in advance what a sufficient home, a sufficient car, and a sufficient life actually are, and then let every dollar beyond that point flow into building the tank. A person who decides that, say, $60,000 of annual spending is genuinely enough, and then goes on to earn well past it, builds wealth at a speed that looks almost unfair from the outside. The secret is not that they earned dramatically more, it is that they stopped moving the goalpost every time they got closer to it. The sixth move is the quietest and probably the hardest. Mute the comparison feed. A huge share of the pressure to look rich does not come from your real life at all. It pours out of a glowing rectangle showing you a curated highlight reel of people you will never meet, most of whom are performing a prosperity they cannot afford. You are not actually keeping up with the wealthy. You are keeping up with other stretched people who happen to be very good at photography and lighting. The genuinely wealthy tend to be strangely insulated from this, partly because they measure their progress against their own goals rather than a stranger's feed. You can borrow that immunity. Curate what you let in, follow fewer accounts that exist to sell you a lifestyle, and the urge to buy your way into belonging gets quieter almost on its own. None of these moves are complicated. That is the entire point. The strategy of looking poor has nothing to do with hardship or denying yourself a good life. It is about refusing to spend money on the opinions of people who are not paying your bills and aiming that money at your own freedom instead. The dented Honda is not a symbol of struggle. To the people who understand the game, it is the calling card of someone who already won and simply chose not to announce it. But I want to be honest with you about something, because it may be the most important part of this entire video. Everything we just covered, the cars, the houses, the credit, the stealth wealth, the playbook, all of it sits on top of a foundation. And if that foundation is missing, none of it holds for long. You can know that index funds quietly beat car payments, but if you do not understand how compounding actually works, you will panic and sell at the first downturn and undo years of progress in an afternoon. You can decide to define enough, but if you have never learned the difference between an asset and a liability, between debt that builds you up and debt that quietly eats you alive, you will make confident decisions that happen to be completely wrong. The reason so many high earners end up broke is not that they never heard the advice to spend less. They heard it constantly. What they were missing was the underlying understanding that makes the advice finally click and actually stick. Looking poor on purpose is a strategy. Financial literacy is the operating system that strategy runs on. Without it, you are following rules you do not really understand, which means the moment life gets complicated, those rules fall apart in your hands. You can see the gap everywhere once you know to look for it. Two people can read the exact same advice about investing early, and a year later, one of them has a growing account they barely think about, while the other pulled everything out in a scare, locked in a loss, and swore the whole thing was rigged. The advice was identical. What separated them was whether they actually understood what they were doing and why. Numbers without understanding feel like superstition, and superstition does not survive a bad week. The people who quietly build wealth are not following more rules than everyone else. They are following the same handful of basic principles, except they understand them deeply enough that the principles hold even when markets drop, even when a coworker brags about a hot tip, even when the pressure to spend gets loud. Understanding is what turns a fragile rule into an unshakable habit. So if anything in this video landed, if you felt that jolt of recognition back at the stoplight, the most valuable thing you can do next is not to rush out and buy a cheaper car or cancel a subscription. It is to make sure you genuinely understand the fundamentals underneath all of it. How money grows when you leave it alone. How debt compounds against you when you do not. How an ordinary income turns into lasting wealth once you actually know what you are doing with it. That foundation is exactly why this channel has a full breakdown of financial literacy, built as the real starting point for anyone beginning this journey. The place to get the basics right before you make a single major decision. It is the explanation I quietly wish someone had handed me at the very beginning, because it is the difference between following money advice and finally understanding why it works. Get that foundation in place, and every strategy we talked about today stops being a rule you are forced to obey and becomes something so obvious you would never want to do it any other way. Go back one last time to that stoplight. The luxury SUV and the dented Honda side by side, telling two completely different stories about success. You see them differently now. You know which driver is more likely free and which is more likely trapped. And you know the gap between them was never really about income. It was about understanding. The wealthy figured out a long time ago that the goal was never to look rich. The goal was to be free. And freedom is quiet. It does not need a badge, a logo, or an audience watching. It only needs you to understand the game well enough to stop playing the version that was designed to keep you broke. So the next time you feel that pull to spend money proving something to people who are not even watching, remember the Honda. And remember that the richest move you can make is very often the one nobody can see.